should go before the person with a straw in our mouth, meaning feeling very humble. And we should say, my dear sir, my dear sir or madam, you are a very learned person, full of all good qualities. Please forget everything you've learned and listen to me, or listen to this. So Sri Chaitanya is explaining the Vedanta Sutras without touching on Sarvabhauma's explanation. At first, Sarvabhauma resisted Sri Chaitanya's arguments with arguments of his own. But eventually, he became stunned by the truth, beauty and harmony of the Lord's words and listened in rapt attention. Finally, the Lord mentioned a famous verse in the Srimad Bhagavatam that describes the most perfect souls, those who have forsaken all attraction to the material world, as still being attracted to hear about the beautiful personality of Lord Krishna. This verse implies that love for Krishna is transcendental beyond the material plane. Sarvabhauma asked him to explain the verse in detail. Sri Chaitanya agreed, but first he invited the learned teacher to give his own explanations. So Sarvabhauma explained the Sanskrit verse in 9 different ways. When he finished, Lord Chaitanya supplied 64 further explanations of the verse without touching on his teacher's interpretation. Hearing these, the teacher was dumbfounded by his student's erudition. His heart changed, and he understood that he was in the presence of the Supreme Lord himself. So that's where we've got to, is this Atmarama verse from the Srimad Bhagavatam, which I guess we've had already. Atmaramascha munayo nigranta apyurukrame kurvantya haitukin bhaktin itam bhuta gano hari. Those who are self-satisfied and unattracted by external material desires are also attracted to the loving service of Sri Krishna, whose qualities are transcendental and whose activities are wonderful. Hari, the personality of Godhead, is called Krishna because he has such transcendentally attractive features. After hearing the Atmarama verse, Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya addressed Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, "My dear sir, please explain this verse. I have a great desire to hear your explanation of it." The Lord replied, "First, let me hear your explanation. After that I shall try to explain what little I know." Sarvabhauma then began to explain the Atmarama verse, and according to the principles of logic, he put forward various propositions. He explained the Atmarama verse in 9 different ways on the basis of scripture. After hearing his explanation, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, smiling a little, began to speak. "My dear Bhattacharya, you are exactly like Brihaspati, the priest of the heavenly kingdom. Indeed, no one within this world has the power to explain the scriptures in such a way. My dear Bhattacharya, you have certainly explained this verse by the prowess of your vast learning." I sense a but is coming. As Prabhupada said, you begin by saying, "My dear sir, you are so qualified, so wonderful, but you should know that besides this scholarly explanation, there is another purport to this verse." Upon the request of Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya, Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu began to explain the verse without touching upon the 9 explanations given by the Bhattacharya. There are 11 words in the Atmarama verse, and Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu explained each word, one after another. He took each word specifically and combined it with the word Atmarama. He thus explained the word Atmarama in 18 different ways. He then said, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, his different potencies and his transcendental qualities all have inconceivable prowess. It is not possible to explain them fully. And then today's verse. These three items attract the mind of a perfect student engaged in spiritual activities and overcome all other processes of spiritual activity. And Prabhupada explains in the purport. We don't get this explanation here at this point in the Chaitanya Charitamrita. This is where pretty much it ends. Sri Chaitanya is simply told that he explained the meaning of the verse with various evidences. But if we want the detail of that explanation, then we have to look elsewhere in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, especially Sanatana Goswami. Later on, it became famous, this discussion which Chaitanya Mahaprabhu had with Sarvabhauma. And so later on, Sanatana Goswami asked him, I want to hear this interpretation you placed on the Atmarama Shloka. I heard that you explained it in 64 different ways. And so then Sri Chaitanya repeated it. And he repeated it on other occasions as well. But it's not here. So anyway, Prabhupada explains that Atmaramas are of many kinds. Atmarama is a person who takes pleasure in the self. So there are many different types of people who find satisfaction in the self, and that perhaps we can just briefly consider that there is a difference between being selfish and self-aware. If I understand myself as a spiritual being, as an eternal spiritual being, then I can focus on that. I can meditate on myself as an eternal spiritual being, and that's not actually being selfish. And there are many people who practice that. Some of them are devotees, some of them are not. Some of them consider the self to be identical with the Supreme Self. And they're also included as transcendentalists in the Bhagavad Gita. Krishna is quite clear on that. He said they also eventually achieve me. And he's quite sensitive to them in the sense that Krishna uses the word Atma in quite ambiguous ways in the Bhagavad Gita. Sometimes he uses Atma to refer to the individual self, and sometimes he uses Atma to refer to the Supreme. So we are, our philosophy is that the individual self is non-different from the Supreme Self, but at the same time different. So there are many different kinds of people who find pleasure in the self, who have the implication is that they are leaving behind the material world in favor of spiritual realization. And they're finding deep satisfaction in that. And this is also described in the 6th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, that one who finds pleasure in the self, that in itself is a great achievement. We're very fortunate because Krishna says it's a very difficult path to follow.